Welcome back to TIDES, where we explore the human side of transformation in an AI shaped world. Today's conversation is about attention every leader feels. As technology accelerates, are we losing the human touch that makes work more meaningful? Do we have to choose between high tech or high touch? Or is this the real opportunity in blending the two? Joining me is someone who has navigated this space across global learning, talent transformation, and community building. Tejaswini Unni, or TJ as she's known. She's worked with tech startups and global corporations, driving innovation in AI powered learning while also experimenting with deeply human practices like community campfires and even sound therapy. TJ, I'm so glad to have you on Tides. Thank you for joining all the way from India.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me, Shweta. Really excited about our conversation.
Same here. So, we've had the opportunity in the past to work together, and your style of thinking, how you connect the dots, is something that I still remember from our days of working together. So, maybe let's get started by unpacking from your perspective. How do you define high tech and high touch in the workplace today?
Sure. So, the high tech, high touch concept is not new, really. There was a book back in the day, early 80s, by a really great author called John Nasbit. And what he kind of proposed was that the success of any technology really depends on how it shapes the human experience. Right. So it's inversely proportional to that. Kind of continuously see that in today's world, right? So going to an ATM or operating your bank account via internet, vis-a-vis running to the bank, going to the teller, withdrawing cash, and so on, or even social media, right? Staying in touch with your connections, friends, family, and so on. So it's not really new. And what we see is that this applies to organizations as well, organizations and enterprises of any scale, where the success of what you drive technologically, how organizations are more and more data driven, the success is invariably proportional to the kind of people involved and how they adapt to the technology. So high touch and high tech is really, in this AI world, so critical to understand and really look at the convergence of these two aspects coming together.
Absolutely. And from your perspective and the work that you're seeing happening around you, especially we are now kind of geographically also looking at having this conversation from a perspective of where and how AI is being integrated and adopted into the organizations. So, from your perspective, are you seeing organizations swinging to one side or the other instead of balancing both the human high tech and high touch?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because as technology comes in, obviously there is a drive to kind of, hey, let's experiment with this if we have the sort of resources for it, right? Not just the tech and the human resources, but mostly capital resources as well, network resources, and so on. So there is definitely a tendency to kind of take that on and experiment for sure. But the fact remains that while some organizations try it, they may not really be fully committed to it in that sense, right? So there's almost like, okay, let me just experiment, let me see where it goes, and then there is a gradual decline. But that, Shweta, we've both been in change, transformation, change success, and so on. So you know that until there's adaptation and adoption, it's never going to be like truly complete in that sense. Organizations will not be able to derive the benefit. So it's up to teams and leaders to really define how that cycle may look for them. Some may just experiment and go over that, but some may want to be fully committed to seeing what outcomes they can derive.
Absolutely. I'm just curious to also unpack with you the local perspective because, if we compare geographies, India has one of the biggest tech talent base. So, I mean, irrespective of what role you have in the organization, somewhere or in some fashion, you would have been exposed to technology. So, thinking in with the lens of technology, doing with technology is not, I would say, a new thing for the talent in the Indian market compared to, let's say, North America, where if you're in IT or tech sectors or tech functional areas in an organization, you have more exposure compared to, let's say, if you sit in HR or other pockets of the organization. I mean, specifically HR, because I mean, if you look at previous digital transformation undertakings, I don't think HR was involved in them because most of the change practices, like we are talking about, typically sat in IT because it was IT driven initiative. And previous digital transformations also, I'm highlighting the difference here between what I sensed happening then and now. It was like a prefabricated house. We knew exactly what we were deploying. So change, training, communication was geared towards something that was known. This time around, digital transformation is still happening, but the change that we have to facilitate in organization from both adoption and adaptation perspective is something that we truly don't know, like fully know yet. The end state of this change is not defined. So in this kind of a scenario where digital transformation looks different, where the talent that is, having to deal with this AI, which is everything everywhere all at once, is there difference in how, from a local perspective, how talent is dealing with AI adoption? Because here there is a big struggle. The adoption and adaptation with AI isn't what organizations were expecting. What's your take on what's happening in India?
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of, a seesaw sort of a situation, I think, because there's no really sort of there's a lot of grayness out there, because what we need to consider is that even from a sociological perspective, India is really different from the rest of the world, if I may say that, right? Especially from the Western Hemisphere. So while we have a very young population, most of them being digitally native and very comfortable with technology and so on, we also have very close human connections. We also have very close familial ties. We also celebrate festivals larger than life. We have cinema that's larger than life and so on, right? So there is a sort of, like you said, tension between, "Hey, this is the way technology is going, but I'm still rooted in my humanness and community." Right. And more than tension, I would think it's really that expansion of how we are looking at it. So I think the best of both worlds in some sense. But when it comes to organizations and adoption within organizations, I think fundamentally it's a human challenge, right? A human challenge of motivation. And that's worldwide. Right? Things are happening at such breakneck speed. It's kind of difficult to actually split by geography, because things are evolving at breakneck speed. Organizations are experimenting, that's for sure. But whether that adaptation and then adoption is actually happening at a wider scale than other geographies is definitely not something that can be cast in stone. And I still think that there will be a sort of wave, right? There'll be waves across industries. So some, for example, GCCs that are Indian would definitely want to innovate more. So there's a lot of kind of impetus on innovation, on making sure AI is adopted sooner than later and so on, and making a difference for their global firms. But if it's very India run family business, who have the luxury of large pockets of wealth and business plans that are very locally rooted, they will not really adapt AI faster. So that's the kind of spectrum that I wanted to kind of highlight.
That's a very interesting perspective. And this brings us to the upskilling, reskilling, learning and development component, which is a big component of this transformation, because we're talking about integrating AI into our existing workflows. But at the same time, those workflows may not make sense in the new ways organizations have to deliver value to their customers, in new ways that employees have to deliver value through their work to the mission of the organization. So focusing on learning and development specifically, where do you see tech, especially AI, making the biggest impact on learning and talent transformation in organizations?
Yeah, it's a very exciting phase to be in learning because of the kind of tools and capabilities that AI provides, and yet the humanness and empathy, trust, and sort of larger human behaviors that you have to bring to the table for actual learning and development to take place. So it's very exciting in that sense. But I think from a overall learning perspective, AI has really kind of moved beyond, say, quickly creating content or session plans, kind of figuring out, analyzing your data from systems, or even looking at summaries and all of the bookending features, etc. And now it's really moving to AI powered coaching, right? Or AI powered sort of adaptive learning. Back in the day, Shweta, you'll remember we used to spend so much time thinking about, how a scenario could be branched and what the outcomes could be, and how each outcome would lead the learner to different sort of variables, right? And that was really tough learning design. But in the world of AI and the world of today, that can be created very quickly with tools. And you could add so many more layers of, actually layers of learning within one experience, right? So it need not even have 2 or 3 core outcomes, but you can have many outcomes within that. So it's a very, very interesting phase in that sense. So yeah.
Yeah, it totally is. Like I remember a couple of things. One, the typical ADDIE workflow. Like my question is, does it still make sense like for us to have that workflow? And two, the second biggest struggle to your point was how do we adapt and personalize the learning experience to meet the learner and their needs in the moment when the need is happening. We could not scale, we could not personalize our learning experience to that nth degree. So let's talk about ADDIE. What's your perspective on ADDIE? Is ADDIE still relevant? ADDIE is a typical learning and design framework for those who are new to the acronym. ADDIE stands for Analysis, Design, Development, Implementation, and Evaluation. These are the typical phases that a learning team goes through to build a learning product and deliver it to their internal customers. So back to the question, TJ, is ADDIE still relevant and how do you see AI impacting different phases of ADDIE?
Yeah, totally. I think ADDIE as we knew it has definitely changed in the world of today. But going back to first principles, I think ADDIE can be applied to anything like making an omelette, or making a cup of tea, or even, kind of learning a sport, right? That was the beauty of the model which we all grew up with in our sort of career. But then again, in today's world, that's kind of metamorphized into a different series of events, or, a different cycle, if you will, because data one has expanded, right? So analysis is not just limited to conversations, observation on the job, data that you can kind of take from superiors or managers and so on, and all of that. The data is exponential. You can derive data from the person's actual work, right? In a matter of minutes, you can derive data from their outcomes. You can derive data as they go along different parts of the value chain. So the analysis phase is completely metamorphosized because there's so much more power in it. Design still is critical. And I think that's where the whole high tech will really come into play, because you're able to power design with your fundamental human experience and the kind of human emotional quotient that you can add to it. Development has become simple, and I would think that development and implementation will kind of fuse together, because you may even be developing as you implement, right? Or a machine can do that for you in the flow of work, like you said, hyper personalized as you work through, say, fixing a machine, or you're kind of trying to figure out accounting standards and so on. There could be development that would actually get fused with implementation. And frankly, evaluation of outcomes and that whole cycle now goes back to that meta powered
Yeah.
analysis, right? So it's again fused the two ends, I would think, and really one very human powered design, and then the development and implement. So I think it's kind of fundamentally changing. Yeah, thanks for making me think through that.
Very beautifully said, because this is again a great example where both high touch and high tech are involved. The process still applies, but it's going to, using your words, metamorphosize into something that is more contemporary and more relevant to our context and what we have to deliver today. And from the high touch perspective, I would say that the jobs of people involved will definitely change. The work still needs to happen in that same flow. Technology will support that experience, but now you might not need an instructional designer, a graphics designer, a programmer, and somebody who's gathering data and all that for you. Maybe one person can do end to end on their own. There's still
Yes.
high touch involved, but high tech supports that high touch experience for the human involved.
Yes, yes. And in time to come, it would be the learner themselves, right? They would run it on their own and figure out, hey, this is my exact need. And I'm motivated enough, and motivation still remains a fundamental question. But I'm motivated enough to learn, and therefore, I'll go find out and then learn by myself.
That's right. That's right. I mean, even before ChatGPT or these LLMs came into the mainstream, the way we use it today, learners were going to Google and not to the learning management system to consume their learning needs. I feel like now with, like ChatGPT or Gemini or Perplexity, to your point, I feel very empowered as a learner to not just use ChatGPT as a Google, like what is conflict resolution? Tell me about it. I can actually create a prompt that is going to create dynamic experience between ChatGPT and me. That hey, I am let's say a new leader, team leader, and I have conflict in my team, and I need to learn how to manage the conflict. Here's the size of my team. Here's what the dynamic of the team looks like. Can you role play with me this scenario so that when I go to my team meeting, I can diffuse the tension? This is so timely and relevant. But I'm
Exactly.
not sure if organizations are opening up the use of systems like this and educating their employees to leverage, let's say, ChatGPT or Gemini to self learn or close their own learning experiences? Or is there resistance you're sensing from the learning and development teams to say, we can't control that experience. We don't know what you're learning from that experience. So let us curate that experience for you and deliver it to you. Are you seeing that tension between L&D teams and employees?
Yeah. So there are basically, again, kind of don't want to end up generalizing, but there are L&D teams that are very forward thinking. They want to make a difference. They want to experiment. They want to see go through that whole curve we spoke about, or that whole cycle, and really see where this goes, right? And those teams are definitely pushing AI and AI tools and seeing where it leads. But in the enterprise, in the organizational world, there always needs to be boundaries, right? So there's this beautiful study on, organizational sort of dynamic competencies that only an organization knows, because that defines how are things done here, right? So only an employee at Pepsi would know what makes Pepsi different, right? So in an enterprise world, it's always going to have those boundary conditions, because that's what makes the business tick, or that's what makes the business grow. And therefore, it would be very important for L&D teams or business teams to drive the use of AI or the use of learning along those boundary conditions, so to say. And that's what traditionally we have seen. So if this is the job description, this is the job role, then here are the competencies, and then here are the sort of lessons, learning, training, whatever that you have to go through. So you kind of define so that the dynamic capabilities of the organizations are remaining intact, and you kind of pump more sort of vigor and energy into that. But what we are seeing now, and this is what I would call closet learners, right? So learners who are motivated enough to learn about their gaps, so their weaknesses, and they want to actually make a difference in their life. So these are learners who would then go and subscribe for courses on their own. They would take courses on their own. They would go to AI tools to actually see, hey, I'm not able to work well in my team. What would you propose I do? Or, I'm not able to hit pause and I'm kind of, terribly distracted. What are some of the things I should do? And these are my conditions. And give me clues, give me ways to go beyond it. So I would think there's that organizational layer to learning, which will remain, because organizations still need boundaries to maintain and improve their capabilities. But there's also the rise of learner motivation in some sense, and this closet learners who are kind of wanting to make a difference and would want to do that. So yeah, that's how I see that.
I love that. New terminology, closet learners. Interesting one.
The only way I could think of that because, they wouldn't go out and say, I'm doing a call, or wouldn't want to publish it or, put it on LinkedIn and so on. But they're curious and they want to know. And learning how to learn, as you may have seen recently, is like the biggest skill there is. So, how do you keep agile and keep learning?
That's right. That's right. And from a control perspective, also, I feel like traditional way, it is very important for organizations to kind of layer in their contextual information in the learning experience. 100% agree there. But now I think technology also provides us better ways of putting those guardrails, creating that sandbox for learning. We don't have to say if you have to learn how to give feedback using my methodology, come to me and my course that I have developed to use, let's say, STAR methodology, and only then will you be able to learn how to give feedback. You can configure your internal GPT experience with those, like create an internal GPT, which is feedback GPT, which is now trained on your contextual frameworks, contextual information, and allow users to freely use that
Ex-
GPT. So the role of the L&D now becomes curator of learning experience, enhancing the learning experience versus controller of information and figuring out how best to disseminate the information. I know instructional design, so I will tell you how to learn. I think that would be a difficult one for it, might not suit the need of the hour. There was a time and place for it, and there might still be a time and place for it for highly compliance and regulated environments. But to your point, if we have to be very dynamic and fluid and learning agility has to be super high, we have to figure out new ways of balancing, coming back to our original point of balancing high tech with high touch. What is high touch in this learning experience
Yeah,
for learners?
absolutely. Absolutely. So well said. Yeah.
Awesome, TJ. So, since we are talking about balancing high touch and high tech, before we get into high touch, which is a very key component of our discussion today, I just wanted to quickly pick your brain on, talking about high tech. How do you separate the hype around shiny tools from transformation that really matters? Because the speed, like you said, is the speed of change is really, really fast, kind of unprecedented. The tools are evolving at a ferocious pace, and there's a lot of hype around AI. So, how do we find out or separate that hype from reality?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is obviously a lot of hype and also excitement, right? As humans, we are kind of quite excited about where this technology may lead. Let me experiment with this and so on. But really, the fundamental thing for most and all teams to ask really is this technology creating or going to create a measurable shift, right? And from a human lens, is it shifting either behavior or is it shifting the overall performance? Is it improving my decision making capability, organization wide, and so on? So I would say that while hype is living in the tools, the high tech, the transformation really lives in the human outcomes and the business outcomes, so to say. So, for example, I was looking at this AI content generator, which was very impressive and so on. But then, if that would not really improve my capability metrics in any measure, either the application rates or how does it impact talent mobility and so on, it's just going to end up as a lot of noise, right? Not really progress. So again, AI can only be successful when it's augmenting human judgment and not really kind of replacing it. And going back to your point about those organizational guardrails and so on, how is it also helping me with my skilling strategy? How is it helping me create skill clouds and not just be focused on certain things that are to be done for this job, right? So giving that flexibility and dynamism to everybody involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's play a scenario. Let's do a contrast scenario. Imagine one org that automates 90% of their learning, and human coaches only come in for remediation. And there's a self serve kind of an environment in that organization. And another organization has still tons of human coaches who run everything, and tech only tracks completions, let's say. There's a minimal use of tech in that human learning experience. Why would both fail, and what would a true blend look like? Because I'm posing like extreme scenarios of
Yeah.
the pendulum swinging.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a swing that, goes either way, right? So I would think that in case of the organization that believes in just pure technology and automation, and hey, we are here to kind of completely automate the whole learning experience, they would possibly lose things like empathy and trust, right? So they would definitely kind of see a dip, which is very critical in coaching or leadership or even behavioral change, right? Because they would just lose that layer that's so human. And that would result in learners disengaging and feeling that experience itself is so sort of transactional rather than really transforming for them, right? So that's the kind of organization that, and we've seen this, Shweta, in our kind of past where organizations have probably invested heavily in digital learning or digital technology have not really been, and even today, organizations that invest heavily in content libraries do not really kind of get that sort of an outcome in terms of transformation or business change in the actual business metrics and so on, right? And these libraries become sort of redundant unless it's substantiated with the human side of either coaching or training, human connections, community, and so on. And for the organization in today's time, which may rely a lot on human sort of interventions, this would really be unsustainable in the long run, right? As they go through scaling efforts or as they kind of grow in business, they would always be limited in reach, or even for organizations that are, kind of setting up globally or acquiring a lot of organizations, their whole sort of piece about maintaining that consistency, maintaining those same standards of learning, those same standards of human transformation, and so on, would definitely dip. The other piece I think that would definitely be impacted is the sort of power that data can give you to fuel your learning interventions and to fuel your learning roadmap, right? And if an organization is solely relying on human and human touch or high touch, so to say, there would be a certain data blindness that would come with it. And this you could then see because programs would then remain very generic and really impossible to measure and so on.
Yeah, so let's zoom into the community aspect and the human connection that you spoke about. And you've experimented with community campfires. So tell us more about one, what community campfires are, and what did those reveal about psychological safety and human connection for you?
Yeah. I want to make a kind of difference again, in while and just kind of backtracking a bit. While AI and AI tools kind of are supercharging our cognitive sort of experience and giving us, some sort of cognitive feed all the time, I really think that the affective domain, right? The domain that's going to change our values, behaviors, and so on, still fundamentally needs to be human, right? And that's where human connections like community campfires come into play. And this was an opportunity by Dale Gray, who runs the School of the Possible, and we kind of ran some APAC community campfires. And what I experienced there is that there is a shedding of the ego, right? So to say, because then, people very freely spoke about either failure, self doubt. They were so much more vulnerable, which you cannot expect in a sort of, in a high tech sort of world, right? So that really helps because that brings us together as humans, I would think. And in the organizational context, again, I would think that while the concept of psychological safety as we know it is something every leader wants to build, every team wants to have, and so on. But it's not something that you can really put in a policy document, right? It has to come through presence. And that is a very, very human sort of skill, right? It has to come in that sort of indication that I hear you, I understand you. And a very interesting sort of analogy to this whole sound sort of thing there's this whole, that I learned. And there's this Vedic thing about Shruti and Smriti. So Shruti is what you hear, and then, you understand through hearing. But Smriti is more of a divine sort of resonance where, as humans, we know, right? We just know because we remember. So that's a very important distinction. And I think that can only come true in human collaborative environments, in human communities.
Yes, as a learner, I can self serve my needs. If I have issues with, let's say, giving feedback, I can quickly get real time information on how best to give feedback, play a scenario, practice it with AI. But then I'm still doing it in isolation as one human and machine and testing it with other people. But the campfire concept, the connection concept is so powerful because imagine after a certain time, it's not just giving feedback. I have so many such human skills that I want to develop as I grow my leadership abilities, influencing abilities, or just co working abilities with other humans and machines in the future. If I'm constantly learning in isolation, it's going to be quite a lonely experience. So, this is where I feel like you and I both are experiencing similar problems. We are consuming the information differently. We are closing that gap independently, but we're still coming together to say, hey, this was my pain point. This was my struggle. That elevates that experience to a different level. So you don't feel like, am I the only one who's experiencing this gap? Or is it like a collective thing that we're all working on, but we are filling the gaps independently?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think technology has made things definitely easier and, kind of just a lot smoother and so on. But the intentional human connection is becoming more and more non negotiable, right, as we go along. I remember a few years back when I was in the US, I went to a McDonald's and there was this thing about handshaken salt and pepper. That cracked me up because I was like, okay, so like we have handcrafted, this is or handicrafts as we know it. Here is something that's actually you order something that's actually done by a human because then you have that sort of you know exactly how much to put. You may want to. I mean, machines make it easier. Like you can say, okay, just add 3 sprinkles, but there's something about a human doing it. There's something about a grandmom kind of, making that special thing for you. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think with the rise of machines, we will also see more and more demand for handcrafted and, like cottage industry is growing where humans are doing more things. Like you want a, yeah,
Yes,
that'll be
exactly.
interesting to see. Even videos, like you can have synthetic videos, machines can create videos, but then there might be a separate workflow going around human crafted videos where you say the wrong thing, where you trip up, where you have weird expressions on your face in a dynamic fashion. And there might be an appetite and market for that too. Because how much authentic, polished, sanitized content can you consume?
Yeah. And in fact, you will not believe it. I actually look for some sort of a mistake in emails or presentations because I know that's a human mistake. There's a human behind it more than everything being completely spick and span, but yet so spectacular, right? Like paragraphs and paragraphs of content or emails that are just so well crafted. Whereas you know that in a conversation, that may not really be the case, right?
That's
So
right. My goodness, TJ, you just made me think about that for the longest time, we have been training, conditioning ourselves and people in work context to be more like machines. There should be no mistake in a resume. It should be like mistake free, no period missing, no comma misplaced, and things like that. And now suddenly, we are looking for more humanness in what a human brings to work. And I don't think that's going to be an easy shift and transformation. It is a real transformation because now we have to kind of recondition and rewire our brains to think differently and not think like machines because everything in an organizational structure is treating humans like machines in many ways, like your performance. Remember the days at GE? We had to, even though we were in a very handcrafted business of creating learning experiences, we were still measured on how many defects we
yeah,
produce in our.
ZD. Yeah, ZD.
That's right. And it's the same methodology that they will apply on aircraft, building aircraft engines, where machines are producing components. That same methodology was applied to humans. So we as humans had to learn ways of being, operating like machines. So It's a very interesting transition at a very fundamental level of how human thinks and how humans and machines will collaborate. So the next level of collaboration is not just between humans, but humans and machines too.
True,
And
absolutely.
everything in the organization has to be rewired to support that experience. The old ways of performance management, the old ways of, supporting humans in work context might not be relevant in the
True.
future of work where we're going.
Exactly. That's where, that whole like dependence or the futuristic move towards skills, like being a skills based organization or being a skills based team or even a multi skilled individual really comes into play, right? Because then you're just so motivated with the skills you need to be in and you sharpen that continuously. And
Yeah.
we spoke about how AI is helping in cognitive domain and then, the affective domain being so difficult because that'll always need a human sort of endeavor or a balance. And I think more and more we'll also come to actually sensorial experiences, right?
Yeah.
May restart our hobbies because that's such a human thing to do, or we may start actually cooking rather than going to a restaurant or ordering in, because that's where we actually just being human, and that will make a difference. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I want to do another episode with you on not just Vedas, but also on the Gurukul system because we're talking about skills based education and learning experiences. And our education systems right now are not geared towards helping us hone and sharpen our skills, help us identify from a younger age what are our core skills and innate abilities that we have and how do we sharpen those versus still a very industrialized way of thinking about bringing kids into a classroom. Everybody is evaluated, everybody's trained the same way, and everybody's pumped out with grades to the next class grade. It's Gurukul systems will be another interesting conversation for us to have for those who are left listening. Ancient Indian humans had a very different education system, which was skills and craft based versus broad stroke solution for everybody. So that'll be an interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be exciting for sure. The world of AI and education is completely something else.
That's right. That's right. And I'm excited for that development too, because it's about time that we relook at our education system and not educate our kids to fit the industrial complex versus help us become better human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel, right, there was the industrial age and then the information age, and then there is some thinking to be done in this age, whatever that is. And that could be a high tech, a high touch age, but some thinking to be done on how that evolution kind of progresses. Yeah.
Absolutely. And coming back to our high touch and high tech future of work that we are building, in our last segment, TJ, for those who are listening, the message that we have all gained from our conversation with you today is that we don't have to pick one or the other. It's not going to be full high touch, it's not going to be full high tech. So we have to design for both. So, in that situation, what are some practical ways that leaders or people who are making those decisions and choices, how can they think about designing those experiences that blend both high tech and high touch in the best possible way?
Yeah, that's interesting because leaders always have that sort of mantle that they carry, right? And I think in today's times, it's become even more important that what sort of an example am I setting for the organization, for the industry and the ecosystem at large, right? What exactly am I doing? So I think it's important that firstly, for any sort of, implementation that you want to do or even start with AI, even experiment and so on, you would really have to start with digital confidence, right? More than digital capability first. So really getting that confidence level up, and that could be through a multitude of ways, but that's really the important piece where people feel safe to experiment and fail and also not be judged with what that may lead to, right? So that really becomes important. The other thing is about really democratizing access where required, and there are tough choices to be made there, that really depends on the organizational context and what kind of road mapping they want to do. Really democratizing access across levels, across the pools of experiments that you want to run, etc., would important as leaders as well. And then from a learning perspective, and this is where the exciting part is, right? So how do you, again, the way we think in classic sort of learning and development, how do you kind of build that mobility, starting with the awareness layer, right? Then the application layer, and then really looking at, okay, what can I do specifically? What kind of experiments can I run? What sort of business impact can I achieve in what time, and so on. So really being very sort of intentional about it is important for leaders to do. And I think there's also this thing about, building human AI partnerships, so to say. So really making sure that everyone understands that this is not going to be a replacement. It's going to be an augmentation, or rather a reimagination, right, of how roles are going to perform. There are going to be different roles that are going to come in. There are going to be different kinds of ways in which humans will, over time, kind of develop. So that's important to understand as leaders as well. And lastly, I would think as leaders, it also becomes important to be vulnerable in that sense, knowing that you may not have all the answers. It's a tide that's shifting. So it's important that as you experiment, there may be other shifts that may come in midway, and it's totally okay, right? As long as you kind of are in constant communication with your teams. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I want to zoom into the roles piece that you talk about. Do you imagine new roles emerging to manage this blend or crafting this right blend between high touch and high tech?
Absolutely, absolutely. And while I don't want to get into details of exact roles, etc. I think what AI is doing is definitely looking at two things, right? One, and this is really super important. How do we look at data? How do we treat data? How do we kind of know the power of data? Because for any sort of AI experiment to scale, data is so fundamental, right? And we have known that as learning designers back in the day. Businesses have known that to kind of expand and make impact in the ecosystem. But the sheer sort of availability of data today is also mind-boggling, right? So how do you kind of zone in to the data you need? So that's very important. And then from a sort of role perspective, I think there will definitely be roles that are reimagined, right? And there may be roles that kind of shape shift to something that's completely new, that's augmented with AI. Because again, like I said, there will not be a sort of replacement. That would be a wrong way to think about it. There would definitely be augmentation in whatever sense that kind of comes in, right? So even if you take decision making, for example, machines can make decisions and humans can make decisions too, right? But machines can make superior decisions in some cases, and humans can make superior decisions in some cases. So, how do you take the best of both worlds, right? That will become important. So, in that sense, there will definitely be a sort of, rejig of roles. And what comes to mind also is that, Shweta, learning becomes so critical in this whole dynamic, right? We spoke about skills, and we spoke about dynamic capabilities that are core to the organization. So it really becomes important. And I think there'll be a time when learning is ambient, right? It's what system is about in an organization. And the success of the organization depends on what sort of speed learners do you have? What sort of closet learners do you have? And, how are they kind of really going up that value chain by themselves, like constantly motivated to do a better job, learn new things, and really excited about what they bring to the table.
I love how you're thinking about the future state of learning and development and layering it into the context of where the businesses and the world is shifting with AI. Ambient learning. That's another one that I'm looking forward to reading some more articles that you write on that topic, because it's such a powerful way for us to think about the future of learning, that there is no way but to learn. We talked about continuous learning in the past. This is the time when we have to have that mindset of continuous learning, because we also talk about building the plane while we are flying it. This is the time when we are building the plane while we are flying it, without knowing what kind of plane we'll end up building, because we just don't know the end state of this change defined yet. So I love the new terminology that you have introduced to us. Last question before we wrap up. I was going to ask looking 5-10 years ahead, but that's too far a future for us to project. But if we look at a year or two from now, what does a high tech, high touch workplace look like from your perspective based on what you know so far?
Yeah, totally. So the way, again, this is just sort of, looking into the crystal ball because everything is changing so fast. It may not really be relevant weeks down the line. But I would think, a few years down the line, it would definitely be a sort of, augmented reality in that sense. Or we know about augmented reality tools and learning, but reality itself will be augmented with AI, right? And not really seen as automated. But AI is really almost like an invisible ally, right? So you depend on it for things, for routine tasks, and so on and so forth, so that you could really focus on the more human sort of creative endeavors or decision making that we spoke about that is superior and so on. And then the bit about human connection, Shweta. So the high touch piece, that would definitely be the differentiator, because even in hyper digital environments, things like emotional intelligence, trust, high touch leaders who can actually listen to you and hear you in that sense, understand you, would become important, right? So that's really going to be important as well. And I think I was thinking about this whole, and I think a lot of organizations do this, the whole social listening piece, but within organizations, right? So data drives empathy in that sense. So your employee experience is continuously shaped by the data you can get through either analytics or what they kind of learning, what sort of behavior signals you give. So it's almost like the high touch is going to be informed by the high tech, right? So, like the more technology and AI come in, you're also kind of incrementally improving the human experience as well. So, yeah, that's the way I would see it.
Absolutely. So, TJ, my takeaway is that tech gives us scale, human touch gives us meaning. And the future of work isn't about choosing one over the other, but it's about weaving them together. So, thank you. Thank you so much for reminding us that transformation is most powerful when it's both digital and deeply human.
Thank you. It was great to be here with you and have this conversation, Shweta. Thanks for setting this up. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you all for listening to Tides, where we keep exploring how to build organizations that thrive in an AI shaped world. Until next time, keep experimenting.